Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We have a number of folks that are joining online, so we're letting the webinar kind of open and let our online audience join us, and then we have a few more people that are expected here in this audience. So give us just a couple more minutes, and we'll get started. Yeah.
It's totally true.
We don't. That is very true. Yes. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I told you to call it. We talked about this last week. I think that yes, it's aggressive. Something they ever saw, I like this. Yeah.
Catrick, and on behalf of the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance, it really is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program. We are truly honored to host Bianna Golodryga to discuss her powerful new book, Don't Feed the Lions. Thank you for being here. Co-authored by Yonit Levy. Bianna Golodryga is a senior global affairs analyst and anchor at CNN, where she covers international politics, global security, and major breaking news stories. A distinguished journalist, she's previously served as co-anchor of CBS This Morning, a co-host of ABC's Good Morning America. Born in Moldova in the former Soviet Union and raised in Texas, she brings a unique global perspective to her reporting. Bianna is the co-author with, as I said, with renowned Israeli journalist Yonit Levy, anchor of Israel's Channel 12 News, of the new middle grade novel Don't Feed the Lions. This book, inspired by their friendship and support of each other and their shared belief in educating and empowering young people to stand up to intolerance. She serves on multiple boards and has been recognized for her advocacy on behalf of democracy and human rights. This story that you'll be hearing about today that feels both timely and deeply personal, especially for those of us like Bianna and myself who come from families who left the former Soviet Union in search of freedom, dignity, and a future without fear. We grew up understanding that what happens when intolerance goes unchecked, when hatred becomes policy, and when silence becomes complicity. Don't Feed the Lions reminds us that these lessons aren't just history, they're urgent and present. Through the story of one family and the courage of young people willing to speak up, Bianna and Yonit invite us to remember that leadership is not defined by age, but by moral clarity and the willingness to act. At the Museum of Tolerance, we're dedicated to empowering visitors, especially young people, to recognize prejudice and hate and responding to it with courage, empathy, and action begins with the choices that we make every single day. I want to thank everyone for joining us both in person in our audience today, as well as all of the folks that are joining us online for a conversation with our very own Deborah Camille. And joining us, and please join me in welcoming Bianna Golodryga.
Thank you, Mark. Bianna, thank you so much for being here. We're thrilled both that at the publication of this book, which we think is very important, and also that you have come here, especially on this rainy weekend in Los Angeles. This is a very good book. It's engaging. It feels very real. I related to it very much. And it felt very familiar. And so the timeliness of it, I think, is one of the things I'm hoping that we can talk about. Can you tell me a little bit about the plot? Let's start with that.
Thank you, first of all, for having me here. Thank you for coming. I know the weather is dreary and not typical LA weather. So I brought my mom, my kids. We thought we'd have a sunny weekend in LA, and it's a little, not what we had hoped for, but they've had a great time, and I'm grateful that you all came out. And for those joining virtually, thank you. So yes, this was a book that if you would have asked me 5 years ago whether I'd write a middle grade or young adult book, fictional story with a good friend who lives 5,000 miles away, I'd say, yeah, you're crazy, keep dreaming. And yet this was the perfect book for us to write, given the dynamics and the headlines and the world we live in today. And I have, as I noted, my kids here, and I've seen how my 13-year-old he's a voracious reader. I see the subject matters that appeal to him. Sports, I think, really dominates a lot of headlines that kids this age gravitate towards. And so when my son started asking me questions before October 7th about anti-Semitism, and having reached out to a school to find out what resources they have dealing with some of those issues and answering those questions, I was surprised to find that there were none. And so that seed was planted back in 2022. And after October 7th is when Yonit and I said, listen, we've got to do something. And I said to her, I have an idea for a book. A lot of it's inspired. It's a fictional story, but a lot of it is inspired by real life events, by celebrities, by sports heroes that do the wrong thing and don't pay the price or face the consequences for their actions. And so the book is about a Jewish family with Israeli grandparents who had immigrated to the United States and settled outside of Chicago. It has three main protagonists: 13-year-old Theo Kaplan, his 11-year-old sister Annie, and their friend Gabe, who is new to town and moves to their school from North Carolina after tragedy has struck his family, and he's also 13. Gabe is an ally, a wonderful, wise beyond his years, very cerebral and thoughtful boy who's not Jewish. And we thought it was really important not just to have, your token ally or non-Jewish friend in this book, but every day, it depends on what time of day you ask us which character's our favorite, and we have a different answer. And the story begins when a celebrity soccer player says something anti-Semitic that goes viral, that's caught on camera and goes viral. And then you see the ripple effects of that when the adults in these children's lives, whether it's their teachers, their coaches, their principals, don't step up accordingly and address the issues of anti-Semitism head on and aggressively enough. Soon after this anti-Semitic remark, a swastika is drawn on Theo's gym locker. And you get to see how all of the characters, told through their own voice, respond to the ensuing events and the metastasizing anti-Semitism in their lives.
Yeah. That's what it's not a simple book. It's multi-layered. There's a lot of different stories going on, but I especially was paying attention to all of the different touch points that it had for kids. COVID, sports, social worries, digital hate. There's a lot happening there. And I felt like also there's one of the, Gabe is dealing with the death of a parent. This is a book that expects a lot from kids, that it doesn't talk down to them. It's really expecting them to be able to process and handle very complex and difficult situations, which is one of the things I really loved about it.
Thank you. Yeah, we had made the decision not to write this book in a post-October 7th world. It had been clear, even when doing our research, why perhaps there was a void in materials like this dealing with anti-Semitism for this age group, that it became a touchy and uncomfortable subject matter for many teachers and educators to tackle, because they would automatically link it to events in the Middle East. And so, like I said, in 2022, when we had a spate of anti-Semitic remarks and social media posts from celebrities like Kanye West and Kyrie Irving, we were actually going to an NBA game when Kyrie was playing for the Brooklyn Nets with my son. And we were driving over the Brooklyn Bridge, and Jake turned to me and said, why are we even going? Does he not want me there? Why do they hate us? And it was just one of those questions that, hits you like a gut punch. And I reached out to the school, and then, I said, mind you, this isn't a post-George Floyd murder world, where thankfully there had been so many resources put in towards anti-racism, hate in general, how to talk to your children about, racism. And we were getting emails almost weekly about what the school was doing on so many other social justice movements. So I assumed at the time, like, there must be something on anti-Semitism too. And when they said, no, there's actually no materials that we have at our school or resources at this age group, we wait for them to ask questions in class. And once they do, then perhaps we can start engaging in conversation. And I was thinking, as curious and as smart as my son is, I can't imagine him raising or having to raise his hand in front of his friends and ask a teacher about anti-Semitism. So yes, so that is one thing where we came to the idea of writing this book through the lens of children having to grapple with issues that become a burden on them when the adults in the room, their educators, those that are the decision makers, aren't making it for them. And so we all know that kids instinctively know right from wrong. And they turn to their parents, they turn to their educators, they turn to their principals, and are sort of, implicitly waiting for them to say something about it, to acknowledge, yes, what you're feeling is right, and here's what we're going to do about it. And instead, when they don't, or they're not condoning anti-Semitism, but perhaps they're dealing with the problem as if it's a one-off, and then they move on, then the kids have to deal with the mess that unfolds after that and a lot of the emotions that they're dealing with and internalizing. So yes, and then at the same time, we all have kids. We've all been at that age where, what we're going through is the most important thing in the world. No one can understand what I'm experiencing. And Gabe brings a different dynamic to that story. He has lost a parent. He's moving to a new city, to a new environment, making new friends. He has another parent thousands of miles away serving in the military. So all of these things, I think, together cumulatively make for a very compelling story that's separate from the anti-Semitism theme. We hope that kids this age group would be drawn to. We didn't want to write a didactic book or feel like it's a homework assignment.
Right. What it seems to me is that this book, actually, if you read it when you're in those grades, say you read it when you're 12, 13, 14, it kind of primes you, right? You can explain to children how to respond to anti-Semitism in any way that they can I feel like it's very difficult to train. Mm-hmm. But if you have read a story,
yes,
and you remember how the different characters reacted, and there's a variety of different reactions in this book and responses and thought about how to respond, then maybe you have a template. And that's what I think it provides to young kids.
Yeah, and again, when we went back to find books that touch on, issues that relate to Judaism, there are plenty of books for young readers on Jewish holidays and Hanukkah and things like that. And then older kids are introduced to more deep and painful lessons from our history through the Holocaust. And yet there's nothing in between. And we know that anti-Semitism morphs. It's been with us through millennia. It's a growing cancer that has peaks and valleys, comes and goes. I didn't experience much of it as a kid myself. And so I perhaps was a bit shocked and naive to think that it would come at us as quickly as it has. And that's why, we've introduced social media in this book as well. I mean, the realities that a lot of kids are grappling with even 10, 20 years ago wasn't the norm. And so, yes, an anti-Semitic remark is made. There's nothing new there. But what happens when that anti-Semitic remark is picked up by millions and millions of viewers and people around the world? You see how that can sort of spiral and create even bigger social complexities.
Right, especially when it's been posted by a celebrity or a role model or a soccer hero or right. And that's another thing I really loved about the book was that it's not just it teaches how anti-Semitism spreads and how hate spreads. It starts with, in this case, one post and then starts to spread throughout the school and the community of the school. And I think that's a very typical and also like a way for kids to learn. This is how hate is, it disseminates throughout our communities.
And especially when you're a minority. I mean, this was one of the interesting dynamics between Yonit and me is that for Yonit, and this was the first time her kids, who were around the same ages as my kids, had been exposed to or heard about anti-Semitism. Because for all of the issues and conflicts and concerns that Israelis have on a daily basis, when you are a majority in your country, anti-Semitism typically hasn't been one of them. And that's one of the differences between Jews in Israel and Jews in the diaspora is that we are the minorities here. And when anti-Semitism, like other forms of hate against minorities, isn't addressed, isn't elevated to the level of concern and importance that other forms of hate is, then it's allowed to fester. And I feel even for me, looking back at it, and I remember covering the Tree of Life shooting, and remember that was, again, you have anti-Semitism on all sides, the right, the left. In that instance, you had a right-wing terrorist who was protesting immigration laws in this country and was targeting an organization which happened to be the organization that helped my family move to the United States highest. And that attack, and even for me as a journalist, knowing that anti-Semitism is pervasive, knowing that the FBI statistics has shown for many years now that it is by far the highest form of hate against any religious minority, to me also it was like a one-off. It's sort of a game of whack-a-mole. Oh, here we have an attack. Oh, there's an anti-Semitic form of violence against a Jewish institution in California. All of this is happening, and yet we're not having the national conversation as to why and what this means, and the 5 alarm fire has not been rung yet. And I think it was only after October 7th when we realized that we've got a major issue on our hands. And we go back and look at how everything has been handled. Again, this book is a fictional book, but a lot of what's happened in this book are, almost word for word, real life events that have happened to members of my family, in schools, in swastikas being painted on school walls, and swastikas popping up, anti-Semitic comments being made. And the way they've been handled is, no one is condoning it, but it is or not handled, right? But it's sort of swept under the rug, and we move on until there's the next attack. And by not talking about it, I think it only exacerbates the problem. It's not addressing the elephant in the room. And sadly, this has been a pervasive elephant in the room that it's only growing and been with us for millennia as Jews.
Right. And now it's sort of come to life again. And part of my being able to relate to the book was also that my son had had a very similar experience with swastikas carved in the desks of his school here in LA. So that was so it's a very real thing, and everybody will connect to the book in that way. So there must have been a moment with you and Yonit talking across, thousands of miles, first about October 7th, but then a switch of focus in a way to what was happening here in the US and around the world, as far as like this spike is sort of what I think about as October 8th or everything that happens afterwards, that fallout. That must have been something you guys gradually, in order to get to this book, started to discuss.
It wasn't even gradual. I mean, Yonit and I have known each other since the 2016 presidential election. She came to the US and interviewed me leading up to that election and Trump's victory. And we stayed in touch ever since. We really hit it off. We're about the same age. We have kids. We're both female journalists. And we became very close friends. And on October 7th, I remember that weekend, I was in Albany with my son Jake for a soccer tournament, and woke up to the news of this attack. And, sadly, we see headlines like this early on many times. So I thought, oh no, another attack, another skirmish in Israel. But then pretty soon it was clear that this was different. And so I'm trying to be a soccer mom from the sidelines here, while at the same time looking at my phone and realizing I need to speak to Yonit. I need for her to put out an emergency podcast. Many of you have listened to Yonit's Unholy podcast, but it's a must listen. And so we spoke the next day. 2 people I spoke to: Dana Bash, my colleague, because I had just started my show at CNN a few weeks before. And I thought, oh no, this is going to be dominating all of our coverage. So I reached out to her about, how are we going to be covering this? And then Yonit, and I said, you need an emergency podcast. How are things going? And we stayed in touch over the next few days. And then it was October 20th. She went back and looked at our conversations and correspondence. October 20th, I said, I have an idea. We need to write a book, and we need to target for this age group in particular, because she thought maybe we're going to go to college campuses. We should speak. We'd seen already, this is before the IDF even went in, we'd seen the spike in anti-Semitic attacks. We'd seen that the heightened and heated rhetoric. We'd seen the protests, the well-organized protests, within days after the attack. And so it was clear, even from my reporting, that something was going on, that this was different, and this was something that Jews felt very vulnerable about and defensive. And so that was October 20th. We had the book ready to be pitched, the first chapters, the plot lines, for the most part, conceived by the end of 2023. So we submitted this to publishers in December 2023, early January 24.
That's so, you guys were on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting thing, that the view from that chair of an anchor allows you, right, to have a very broad and also detailed, right, insight into what is happening in the country, what is happening in that country, what's happening around the world. And maybe that gave you the sort of perspective to say, where do we weigh in?
Right. Well, it was clear early on that Jews felt they had to worry about identifying themselves as Jewish, whether it's the jewelry they wear, whether they, the headwear they wear. There were conversations this is in Manhattan in 2023, conversations about people being afraid to get into an Uber because of their name, having mezuzahs on their walls, what conversations should they be having with their college students. And it was pretty clear that this effort at delegitimizing the state of Israel and Zionism as a whole had been in the works for many years. And that was another reason why it was important for me to have a co-author, an Israeli co-author for this book. While it doesn't touch on the conflict in the Middle East, it was our way of saying, you draw a line when you start to question whether Zionism is even a legitimate form of government, and just the idea of having a Jewish state that's homeland to the Jewish people in our ancestral homeland. Whatever your politics may be, we don't delve into that. But it was clear that there was this new form of anti-Semitism that was brewing, that, it wasn't fashionable at the time, maybe it is now, to say, I don't like Jews or I'm anti-Semitic, but it was more along the lines of Jews are fine. I just don't think Israel has a right to exist.
Or the policies of Israel. Yeah.
Well, policies are, fair game, and any country's policies are fair to attack and to criticize, and we do that. But if that's the only country whose policies you attack, or the majority of countries whose policies you attack, I mean, you look at our friends and adversaries, even our biggest adversaries, no one's walking around, despite all of his war crimes, saying, does Russia have a right to exist?
Right.
Does China have a right to exist? Does North Korea have a right to exist? Does Iran have a right to exist? And yet this is a conversation that more and more quote unquote serious people are debating on social media, most of all, about Israel.
About a modern liberal democracy,
Yeah,
right?
warts and all.
We don't say that about England, or that we
Yes.
don't like these policies, but we never ask whether England or the UK has the right to actually exist. So one of the things I love about the book, another thing I love about the book, is that, again, the focus is anti-Semitism and this event that happens and how it affects all these people. But the other side, and when I was raising my son, I was always worried that I didn't want anti-Semitism or the Holocaust to be his sense of his Jewish identity. Like, I didn't tell him about the Holocaust for a little long. He heard about it in school first before he heard about it from me. We learned about Jewish history, Jewish philosophy, right? The way Jews pass the year. This book has the other side. It doesn't just deal with anti-Semitism. It has all of these beautiful aspects of the Jewish experience and the Jewish world and the American Jewish experience. And that must have been something you guys did purposefully.
Yeah, it's centered around Shabbat. And that was really important for us to start the book with, and to really have as the focal point for the family to gather every year in a crazy upside down world. And what you hear from Jewish friends and non-Jewish friends is how much people love the experience of having a Shabbat dinner, whether they're going to a friend's house for Shabbat dinner or whether they're having it at their own family's house. And it's the one constant in their lives that they can always look forward to and can always expect. And so we decided to, as we were putting the plot lines of this book together, and it's like the two characters we had the hardest time actually building depth for were the mom and dad, because it was like these incredible grandparents.
The grandparents are fabulous.
Who's, the grandfather, sort of this hippy dippy Israeli who, we had like a Bob Dylan type of figure in our mind, Leonard Cohen.
Ponytail.
Yes, ponytail and all, who had a one-hit wonder when he was a musician in the 60s and 70s. And, he was on tour in the US and actually toured with Leonard Cohen once. And then they settled in Chicago. They fell in love with Chicago. His wife is fire. She's, sort of 4'0", force of the family, Talia Kaplan. And so we developed these characters. Yonit spent a lot of time on them, and we spent a lot of time on the kids. And then it was like, okay, well, these parents need to have some sort of say. So the idea of celebrating Shabbat and having Shabbat be the starting day of the book, as well as Annie's birthday, was important for us, because there are so many life lessons and traditions that we hear about Judaism, about the culture, about how rich it is, the foods, how, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, all the different countries that come together to bring sort of the beauty of the religion. We try to highlight that in the book as well. So it's not just, anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and
Right.
nothing else.
Right. And yeah, Shabbat is very special. The food, there's a lot of like cooking and everybody being involved in the cooking. And there's other sort of elements of Jewish life, like this messy, interesting house that I think the grandparents live in, and the necessity to talk about everything and discuss everything and argue about things, and to also stand up for social action. The parents kind of trying to prod, right, the children into like taking a stand. So I really value the fact that there was so much positive Jewish identity in there that sort of teaches all a sort of 360 view of American Jewish life. For me, was very interesting. Um, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Gabe, because Gabe is the third kind of protagonist, who is this non-Jewish kid. His mother has died. He's grappling with that. He sees things very clearly. He's an empath. He's an ally. And he comes from the outside and he says to Theo, the boy, are you going to do something about that? Like, there's a moment in the book where he says, like, are you going to complain about the swastika that's right, that ends up on him?
Yes.
So Theo was for me, a character that expanded the world of the book beyond this Jewish family and the Jewish community. Here's a righteous Gentile.
Yes. So Gabe, we then were a bit worried. I think we've made him a little too perfect. So we had to then remind ourselves this kid is only 13, and has many issues and challenges that he's facing as well, and doesn't always perfect in how he's addressing them. But yes, he is new to the school. As we were trying to put a timeline to the story, and we settled on 2022. We remember that it was only a few years ago that we were going through the worst pandemic we've had in over a century. And so we wanted to have the element of reality at that time. And we were just coming out of COVID. Gabe's mother was a nurse who had been a first responder, and she died, sadly, of COVID. She'd been struggling with the complications for a while, and she passed away. His father is serving overseas in the military, and so he moves with his aunt and older brother to Chicago. He moves with his older brother to live with their aunt in Chicago. And so for him, he grew up in a Christian household and family. He's part Korean. His mother was half Korean, so he's a quarter Korean. So he experienced a bit of the xenophobia and Asian hate that was directed at his mother when she was a nurse at the time. So he comes with that knowledge, and he comes to a new town, a new school, and this new classroom with this kid, Theo Kaplan, who's not as comfortable in his skin as perhaps Gabe is. And this is right after the anti-Semitic slur, and he sees how Theo is uncomfortable with his friends' responses to it. They know that this is Theo's favorite player, and they're sort of egging him on, like, hey, what do you think of what he said? And at one point, before Theo has even spoken out vigorously against Wes Mitchell, who's a soccer player, his comment, it's Gabe who breaks the ice by saying, I think he's a horrible person. And he goes down a list, not only about the anti-Semitic comment, but about how he called COVID a hoax, and all of these irresponsible comments and actions that he made and got away with because of his celebrity. And he, having experienced real life COVID and how that impacted his life, said this man belongs behind bars, not playing. Yes, he knew. And this was the first time where Theo had seen somebody really step up. And not because he had been the victim of anti-Semitism, but because he called a spade a spade. And also then, after the swastika is found on Theo's locker, this is a real life example I'll tell you from a member of my family in 2017. This is almost word for word that you'll find in the book, because the parents are educators. They work as professors at the university in Chicago. And in my family in 2017, there were a few instances back to back of swastikas found on a school locker or wall painted at the school. And my husband, at this point, this is my stepson in Washington, D.C., and my husband reached out to the school because they had sent some sort of milquetoast email about, oh, another swastika. It was like a tertiary issue, you know.
Yep.
We had a pipeline burst, the buses rerouted, and by the way, a swastika was found, right? And my husband then wrote back and said, you know, you've got to do something about this. This is a serious issue, a serious violation and crime, and we need to know what you're doing. You've got swastikas spray painted on walls, and you're not addressing this seriously enough. And the response from the head of the school, similar to a response we see in this book, is, you know, I'm surprised at your tone. And they weren't, first of all, they weren't spray painted. One was in pencil and the other was on a dry erase board. And so they've been taken care of. They're gone.
Yep.
And the gaslighting is something I think we've all experienced, we've all witnessed, and sort of, you know, don't believe what your own eyes are telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't believe what you're feeling. And for some reason, Jews are allowed to, you know, not, or being told what they view as anti-Semitism is not. And so that's an example in the book of how the principal responds to these swastikas when Theo finally has the courage to go meet with him and say, you know, this is not right. That was my locker and something needs to be done about it.
Right. And previously the school in the book has put out this thing that says it may or may not be a problematic, right?
May
There's
not be
something
a violation, yes.
mealy-mouthed,
Because then you have to go through sort of the disciplinary actions and the red tape of filling out forms when there is a violation like this, and the principal puts the onus on Theo as to whether he really wants to go forward and make this complaint official, because the soccer team may not then be allowed to play in the finals. So it's one of those, well, you're a good player. You sure you want to do this to the team? You sure you want to do this? It's going to be a big headache, but whatever you want to do, we'll do. And it almost felt like when celebrities were making anti-Semitic remarks in the country, that was the real life reaction among so many others.
Sure.
Well, the Brooklyn Nets are doing so well, though. Are we really going to break their record? And this, you know, that other players were coming to their defense, and then, you know, and then you hear this now. Well, this will only increase anti-Semitism now. So, you know,
Right.
are you sure you want to do that? Because it's going to make things even worse. And that seems to be unique for the Jewish community.
Jews, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is something we often do here at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, is we sort of, if you were to juxtapose this on another group, this same exact thing, right? Changing the relevant symbols or slurs or whatever, would this be acceptable?
College campuses,
or
yeah, what we saw, you know, the
course.
focus of these the heads of these institutions when they were testifying before Congress and before with their actions was, you know, more focus on First Amendment rights, and, you know, making sure that they were speaking lawyerese, and, you know, saying it depends, the context matters, all of this, when everyone knows what they saw and how most Jews felt.
Right. And it's important for us to be able to believe it when we see it.
Yes, exactly.
That you brought up your family. So I'm going to dive into that for a second. So your family were political refugees from the Soviet Union.
Yes.
I'm wondering how that, I know you and Yonit anyway come, as you were talking about this, from different perspectives. How do you think that changes how you, or how it impacts how you see the rise of anti-Semitism, how you speak about it with your parents and your children? And
you know, this is by far the best country in the world, and I'm so fortunate that my parents brought me here. In 1980, as my dad explains, I was their most expensive baggage because we were allowed to leave with only $70 a person, between the 75 for the three of us.
wow.
So I will always give them credit. I had no say in that decision, and I have to, you know, in my education on anti-Semitism from their experience had always been sort of a history lesson of what happened in the past, where a country where anti-Semitism was institutionalized, how that country will inevitably fall and fail, how democracy, if you look throughout history, what starts with anti-Semitism never ends with anti-Semitism. One of the early signs of the erosion of democracy, not that the Soviet Union ever was a democratic country, but, you know, my birth certificate listed me as a Jew, as a nationality. So everything from a library card to, you know, school quotas, Jews were persecuted, and we were fortunate enough because of that persecution to come to the United States. I did not, as I said, experience much anti-Semitism myself, though I was many times the only Jewish student in my class, in my school. We were the only Jewish family in our neighborhood. You know, once in a blue moon, we would get the, you know, you killed Jesus sort of comment thrown our way. I actually think looking back, it was really helpful for me and my non-Jewish friends to go to each other's places of worship. So like my Christian friends would come to temple with me and come to services with me. I'd go to church with them. And many times as a 9 or 8-year-old sitting in the pews there, I remember their reverend would stand up and say, well, we have a Jewish friend with us. The Bedfords brought, you know, please stand up. And people looked at me as if I was, you know, this is the first time they'd ever seen a Jew. And guess what? I looked just like them. And this wasn't an intentional life lesson that our parents were trying to create, but I do think we need more of that just in general. But now looking back and seeing where anti-Semitism is today and how we've allowed it to become so pervasive, there was never, and this is why I just dispute the argument that, oh, well, but for the war in Israel, there would be, or in Gaza, there would be no anti-Semitism. You know, it is the longest war that Israel has conducted. It is a brutal war. Wars are horrible, and there's a lot of, you know, human tragedy and a lot of civilians that have been killed in this war. And I will say, though, we have seen spikes anytime there is conflict in the Middle East. You do see spikes in anti-Semitism. But I don't recall a time when I was growing up and to this day, way before this war, way before the first and second Intifada, that there weren't armed guards outside of my Jewish place of worship, outside of a synagogue, outside of a JCC, outside of a Jewish institution. And I did not see the same for other denominations, for other religions. And I think now, for me, I don't feel safe walking into a Jewish institution when I don't see security. There were multiple bomb threats, I remember growing up, against my temple for whatever reason. And we've somehow, that's been normalized in this country. And that's also not okay. So as we're having this conversation, and as we're trying to defend our democracy and sort of, you know, course correct in some of the ugly directions that forms of hate have taken, you know, from the fringes into the mainstream now, I think these are important questions and conversations to have.
I do too. And the book itself is sort of the vehicle for that, right? Not only publicly, as you and Yonit now are traveling and speaking with people, but also in families, right? And for among kids. I'm wondering, I have a couple more questions and then we're going to sort of open it up. I'm wondering what kids have been telling you about the book.
So my kids aside, I was so nervous when Jake read this. First of all, he was like a fact checker for us because I don't know all the soccer terminology, and the book opens on the soccer pitch. So I'm like, is this a word? Is this a position? Is this like a real play that would happen? And he ultimately was like, yeah. Then there's the language that kids use because you sort of forget you were one time that age, and generationally the language changes. So I would hear my son and my daughter too, but you know, bruh. Bruh is like a word that they use. And so bruh is in this book as well. And as Yonit and I mean, we knew that there was a market for it. We knew there'd be a demand for it. And as we were just giving, you know, speeches and having conversations over the week when she was in the US with me last week, we're like, should we invite parents? Should this be towards teachers, for families, for kids? And we were at the Stryker Center Tuesday night, the day the book was published and released. And we had a conversation with Gary Kasparov, then we had the comedian Elon Gold, and then we took questions from the audience. And an 8th grade boy stood up and said that a swastika was carved on his desk with the words Heil Hitler next to it. And he, as an understatement, went on to say, you know, I really don't like that. And you could hear a pin drop in the room. People didn't know what to say, shocked that this would happen in New York City in 2025. And the next day, his mother sent me a note and said, listen, I have to tell you, you know, we're on this. We're talking to the school about it. We're not happy with how it's being handled, but it's being addressed. We've known about it, but I have to say, this is the first time he's talked about this publicly. And it was, he felt that he was in a safe space and could address it. And so we said, this is what we need to be doing. And we went to a couple of other schools in the city. And when I tell you, and it was just to talk to these kids, and Jewish, non-Jewish, the number of hands that went up with questions, with comments, wanting to talk more about this subject because there's clearly a demand for it.
Yeah.
And, non-Jewish students, what can I do to help Jewish friends? What does anti-Semitism look like? And we're hearing from people around the country, and I'm sure, around the world, that this is a conversation that's been long overdue to be had in schools. Even if there are difficult questions to be asked, they need to be addressed.
That's amazing. I mean, I know, I really, I think that idea of putting kids, starting the conversation. So you're starting the dialogue, you're giving kids an opening. We have these mobile museums of tolerance that are an initiative of the Museum of Tolerance that are traveling education centers. And we have them in a variety of different states. And they take the lessons of the museum on the road, basically, to the doorsteps of all of these various places. And they have an Anne Frank module. It's all facilitator led. They have an Anne Frank module and they have a civil rights module. And what they find, the educators themselves, who are very highly trained, empathic people, what they find is that in these, they're not really buses, in these centers, sitting with the kids, watching these things in an intimate space, that all of these, and again, it's like 5th grade up, the kids want to talk about events, not just, they primarily do not do Jewish schools. It's public schools, often schools that don't have access to tolerance training. And they find that the kids there want to talk about things they are seeing and things that are happening to them. So I see how this book could also do that.
They want to be engaged. They should be engaged. And we live in a progressive world now, thank goodness for that, where we, address forms of hate and social justice. We take it seriously. And yet, it almost seemed as if Jews didn't count. Like they weren't included in that conversation and dialogue. And I know as a Jewish adult, I was surprised and I felt excluded and alienated at times. And I could only imagine what kids must have felt like, because they also want to participate in, they're advocating for their peers. They're learning about different forms of hate. They're learning what they should and shouldn't say and what to look out for. And yet when it's facing them, square in the face with anti-Semitism, something that is an issue and painful for them, to not have the reciprocal responses and reactions from their peers and from their teachers, that will forever stay with them. And that's what we hope to avoid.
Yeah, agree. And as they grow up and go from middle school to high school and college, my son called me the other day and said, I have an international relations teacher who is only teaching the Palestinian side of the conflict. And we discussed, he needs a good grade from this guy, right? There's you don't come from a position of much power. Who are your allies in that space? And this starts that path of like looking for how you express yourself. And so I love that. Last question. So you and Yonit, to me, this also is a Jewish mother story. We are going to fix this problem. But right, 2 Jewish mothers who are also consummate professionals, well-known, acclaimed journalists, take on this problem. And in the process, also, especially for you, and less for Yoni, because it's not an issue, she's in Israel, identify more publicly as Jewish, as an advocate, as somebody who's strong and outspoken. How has that been for you? How are your feelings? What do you feel having written this book and how it's affected your own life?
Well, it's forever changed me. I mean, the whole world turned upside down. I changed as a person, as a Jewish American, as a mother after October 7th. And so for the 2 of us, we say this, and it may sound a bit surprising, but it's been almost therapeutic for us to go through this together. 2 Jewish mothers, journalists, we're covering so much, and we professionally have to sort of separate our emotions and our views with the work that we do. She's, there were days on end where she would be on air for 24 hours. And then for my coverage as well, that's our day job. but we would carve out about an hour and a half, 2 hours a week for Zoom meetings. That's how we wrote this book. It also helps that she doesn't sleep because Israel's 7 hours ahead of us. And so I realized early on that I could text her at any time of the night and she's awake.
Wow.
So that helped. And so we'd spend probably the first quarter of our meetings just talking about life. Like, this happened to me at work, or my kid said this, or can you believe this, or do you agree with me that this is what I think it is?
This actually happened.
And so we'd go through that, and I think that really helped build just the urgency of getting this book out in time where, it's not as if it's a panacea to anti-Semitism, and it's not as if anti-Semitism will go away anytime soon, but we just knew that it would only grow and grow and grow. And this was a tool and a resource we thought that kids and educators should have and needed at the time. But we got each other in ways that I don't know anyone else could. We joke that we're best of friends, and yet our friendship sort of skipped the superficial, trivial, like ex-boyfriends conversations. What were you like in high school? I know nothing about her life from that perspective. I only know suffering and covering hard news stories and needing to address, an urgent problem yes. So hopefully, God willing, there will be time when things are quiet enough in the world where we can have sort of the girlfriend conversations. But I can't imagine having written this with anyone else. And, I did it for my kids and for everyone else's, because kids, I firmly believe the more time kids spend reading books and less on their phone, the world would be a much better place to begin with.
Too.
For even this week and going to bookstores, it's like I walk in and it's my own little therapy session as well. I come out feeling happier, looking at books, just the environment of being in a bookstore where no one's fighting. You want history, you want facts, there's a book, go pick it up. You don't have to follow some crazy person looking for more followers online to get any information. And, as soon as then I turn my phone on, there goes, my blood pressure. And that's what it's meant to do.
Yep.
So the more time people spend reading books, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, and the less time, going online and looking at garbage, I think much better for the world.
Agreed. Okay, we're going to take a couple questions. Mark, is that okay? You want to
Jake, we'll do you last.
We'll get you. We'll get you.
Back, yes.
I promise.
Hi, I'm Lisa. Thank you so much for this. I'm a teacher for a very long time, and I actually work in a prominent day school here in Los Angeles. What grade level or age do you recommend that this book would be for?
That was first of all, thank you for being a teacher, and thank you for everything that you're doing. That was three of the hardest things about this book: finding a title and getting it published. I will say we didn't even get into that in the drama of, we were going to self-publish up until this February of 25, when I happened to be sitting at a dinner party. And at this point, I had no shame, and I would complain to everyone and anyone that I could not find a publisher. No one wanted to touch this book.
Wow.
We submitted it in December of 23, before the war even got as intense as it did. And, though this isn't a good age group, then no one purchases books for this age group. And maybe now's not the time to talk about this. This is not a good, I don't know that anyone wants to talk about anti-Semitism.
Wow.
Maybe in a couple of years, or most of the time we got no responses, zero. And this is, we're two prominent journalists. I'm represented by a major talent agency. We had access to all of the biggest publishing houses. So that was one. I sat next to Michael Linton, who ran Sony Pictures. He now is the chairman of Snap. He said, I'll publish your book. If I like it, send it to me, I'll publish it. He has a small publishing company, Arcadia, with his sister. And the book is now sold out. Like, we cannot get it printed fast enough and put more orders in. So there's clearly a demand. But if Yonit and I had given up, that would be one less resource for kids. So we also did not like to have to target to a specific age group or demographic, because I honestly think this book is for everybody. We wrote it with our kids in mind, but it's like going to a great Pixar movie where there's just as much for the adults as there is for the kids. So I would say anywhere from 9 and up. And I think high schoolers would like this book. And I think parents should read this book with their kids, because the beauty of this age group, between 9 and 14 in particular, is they still talk to their parents. They have conversations, and they ask really important and thoughtful questions. So anywhere between 9 and 13 or 14, I would
I
say.
can attest to the fact that it's great for adults. I literally laughed out loud. There's very funny parts of this. Theo has great one-liners. He's a funny kid. So it's a great read for adults.
Hi, I'm Debbie, former middle school teacher. I'm curious to know if there will be lesson plans or reading guides coming out for the book.
Yeah, so we have been working with the ADL because, Yonita and I are journalists and we wrote a book now, but we are not educators and we're not child psychologists. And I think having input from experts from like the ADL and knowing exactly how to use this book as a roadmap to teaching about anti-Semitism and some of the conversations it can spark would be very important and helpful. So the ADL has been helping us with that, but it is a really important point you make. The other issue we've had is just, there's no centralized way of getting this into or introduced to different school districts across the country. So we are going school district by school district. It is a very uphill battle. It is challenging. I mean, there are all of these sort of levels. Oh, well, it has to win this award or it has to do before it's even brought to certain schools' radars. And, it's just Yonit and me. We got a small little team and, this was a part-time, we have our day jobs too. So we're trying to get this out to as many schools as possible. But I think that's going to be our next real project is introducing it to as many communities as possible.
My name is Carmela. I'm not an educator. I have two questions. First of all, I want to compliment you for writing this book and writing it for the younger age. There are plenty of books for adults, but the younger people are very important. Nobody is addressing them. I have two questions. You said that this book sold and did very well. Did it do with parents, for children, schools? Who are the people who? And the second question, I'll ask both of them.
Yeah.
That away. The second question is, I have 8 grandchildren, so I wanted to give it to the youngest, who is 11, to read. My question is, since I didn't read it yet, does it give the tools to the kids to struggle with that, or just is it informational of what's going around?
I think, first of all, I'll answer your second question first. Thank you for both. I think that this book, I'd like to think that it ends on an optimistic note. And it is one of sort of the takeaways are to speak out, to turn to allies and friends, and for adults around these children to always be hyper aware that they see and feel everything. And when something's wrong, it is incumbent on the adults to speak out and do something. And they shouldn't be shamed by their own students to speak out. But the more that kids do, the more that kids engage with their parents about what happened. I mean, we tend to internalize things, and Theo is the victim here who comes out the victor. But this is happening to him. And instead of getting the support that he needs from those at school, he's carrying all the weight himself. He decides to skip school and pretend like he's sick because he doesn't want to deal with the swastika on his locker. He plays soccer every single week, and his coach, who has made him a co-captain, knows that he has to leave at a certain time for Shabbat dinners, and yet for some reason always has games at 5 o'clock when he knows that he's going to have to leave. And every week it's like Groundhog's Day, where he's reminded of being different and, oh yeah, do what you got to do, which is literally a phrase that the coach uses. So I think the more that kids speak out, the more they talk to their parents about it, the more the parents will then put pressure on the schools to remind them that this is not okay and something needs to be done. And as far as who's buying it, it's been a week. I mean, we've had a lot of pre-orders, but I think it's organizations like the Wiesenthal Center. I think it's synagogues. I think it's communities that have come together and realized that this is a valuable book, one that they don't have. And we don't want this to just be targeted towards Jewish readers. We were on Dr. Phil, and he, was so amazing in his support for this book. And as a Christian, he says, I'm an ally to the Jews, and I spot anti-Semitism and speak out against it because it's wrong and it's anti-Christian. And, what we're seeing happen among some fringes in other religions now too, within Christian members of the ultra right, and obviously we've seen what's happened on the left. To hear a voice like Dr. Phil really come out as an ally has been great. So I would imagine that his reach has helped in the sales too, but I don't have a direct number as to who's buying the books and where.
I just want to add one thing that I think was really interesting about the book is it's not just showing people ending up being victorious, but the book is about the struggle, about struggling to find a way to respond, about struggling to find your way, the way you are comfortable in responding. And so it's not, nobody arrives at their answer quickly in the book, really.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the little girl does,
Well,
Anna. But I
Annie,
feel like it's hard to figure out how to respond. And that's something that the book grapples with.
yes. And again, there's no easy fix, but it all starts with conversations and identifying, you know, that anti-Semitism that you see needs to be spoken out against. Hey, Jake.
State your name for the audience.
Your relation to the author. Yeah.
This is going to be our last question.
Yeah.
Jake's
So
going
I'm
to
the
wrap it
author's
up.
son.
Okay.
Okay. I'm the author's son.
Okay, yes.
So my question is, why, if this country or this New York is so progressive, why can't it, if it calls out Israel saying why Zionism is not legitimate, why, if it's so progressive, why do you think it won't call out Russia and say, for example, you saw there was attacks and I killed 6 people? Why won't they say that that's equally, if not way more, delegitimizing?
You mean for
Good
the
question.
mayor-elect or
Yes,
in general? Well, we don't get into that in the book. That is a different conversation, but I think it speaks to what I said earlier about, you know, completely legitimate to criticize Israel as a democracy. You're nodding your head. I know your views. I will say Jake is somebody who has become much more in touch with his Judaism and his support for Israel following October 7th. He has attended synagogue more regularly. We had his bar mitzvah in Israel last year. He has become one of those one-issue voters, and his politics have sort of leaned to the right. And I think we've seen that, you know, people have, this is not coming from what he sees at home. I think it's a defense mechanism for him when he feels that he's attacked or his religion is attacked or the country that he loves is attacked. But I do think it's a legitimate question to say if only one country is being called out or if one country continues to be condemned while others are not, or even equating Israel with a Russia, you know, that's where legitimate questions need to be asked about what someone's real motives and motivations are.
And I can weigh in on this, Jake, from the view of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is what you're pointing out is a double standard, that the standards we expect from Israel or the people demand from Israel or Jews or given governments in Israel is different than we demand from other people, other nations, other governments. And that's a hallmark of anti-Semitism. I think we're going to...
Mm-hmm. The fact that we now have to, and this, you know, for Jake, he has turned right because he thought, and rightly so, I think there wasn't enough commentary from the left and voices on the left and leadership on the left to speak out about anti-Semitism over the last 2 years. And so now all of a sudden you're seeing it on the right and you're seeing this internal battle playing out in the right and in some of among prominent names in the Conservative Party. And we had Randy Fine, I think is a congressman from Florida who's Jewish, and he was on our air and asked about this. And in all seriousness said, well, I think there are only 2 or 3 anti-Semites in my party, and there are a lot more in the other. And to even come up with an answer like that shows that you've got a problem. When both sides are saying, we've got fewer anti-Semites as opposed to this is not acceptable in any party, that does not bode well, I think, for our democracy. And of course, it's alarming for Jews especially.
All right, I'm going to thank Bianna for staying with us today and
Thank
being
you
here
all.
and for creating a really
Thank you so
significant book.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It was a
you.
real
This was great. I
pleasure.
really enjoyed speaking
Thank
with you.
And
Yeah.
now we're going to sign the books.
Okay.
Yes, Bianna, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was
Really loved
great.
meeting with you. That was great. You're fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Well, you're a journalist.
Yeah.
And thank you
Once
for
a
reading the
journalist,
book.
I have to say,
Yes,
once
always a
journalist,
journalist.
always a journalist.
Yes.
Very difficult to move away.
Yes.
Yeah. But thank you. It was wonderful. Jake, that was a good question.
There's some fruit. Yes.